What you think you shouldn't, quote unquote, do might be exactly what you need to do. And I say this from my own experience, of course. I am not a therapist. And I like to speak in absolutes sometimes because it helps me solidify certain ideas for myself that I use in my own journey. Obviously, there's nuance to these topics, and we're going to talk about the nuances a bit. But I think particularly for those of us who struggle with external expectations, validation, approval, fearing rejection, fearing abandonment, we've probably been conditioned to believe that there are things that we should do and things that we shouldn't do. And those of us also who have been raised as people pleasers often do what they should do, right? They look at the world and the world that they've been told to look at, right, as what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And the shoulds obviously are safer to participate in. But I think, again, from my own experience, as I've gotten older, as I've had to work on this stuff for myself to become more authentic and more aligned with who I am as a person, oftentimes it's the shouldn'ts that you should be doing. And we're going to talk a bit about Jungian shadow work because that's a big part of this as well. I'm not an expert in that. It's just what I've learned about the topic and how I've integrated it into my own life. But the shoulds are often things that you've been told from your parents, your culture, your society, whatever, that will make it easier to function within a certain system. And so there's nothing wrong with participating in them because, again, it's safer, it's probably easier, there's less struggle, and we want to make sure that we're safe. We want to make sure that we're not doing anything that puts us in danger, of course, right? Always be mindful of that. Sometimes we have to play the game, and that's part of life too. But I think it's just more about the awareness of what we're doing and why we're doing it. We don't always have to be doing the shoulds. Sometimes we need to be doing the shouldn'ts. We need to be doing exactly what we think we shouldn't be doing because that shouldn't, whatever it is for you, is probably your most authentic, aligned self. And I want to say first and foremost that when I'm talking about the things you shouldn't do, I'm not talking about things that intentionally hurt other people, that make you a bad person in your eyes, the kind of person you wouldn't want to be, that you wouldn't be proud of, that you would regret being. Those are not the things I'm talking about here, because I know I'm going to get a comment somewhere saying that. We're not talking about that, of course. I would hope that that's understood, but it's fine. I'll reiterate it. We're not talking about the things that would be unaligned with your values and your morals and the kind of person you want to be. We're talking about the things that you've been told are not good enough, are not right based on someone else's understanding or expectations of things, and are things that are just innately you. Like they are just you, and somehow you've been told and convinced that who you are at your core is just not right. You just should not be doing it because of somebody else's beliefs around the topic, whatever that topic might be. So a few of the shoulds that I think we can explore, or shouldn'ts rather, a few of the shouldn'ts might be, it might be a creative dream you have, right? Maybe you've been told that creativity is childish. You shouldn't be doing it. It's not going to make money. There's so many narratives, right? It might be your aesthetic, your style. You shouldn't be doing this. You should be doing this instead. It might be your lifestyle choices, right? It might be that you should be living this kind of life. You should be having these kinds of relationships, but they're not authentic to you. They don't feel quite right for you. And you might have participated in them for a while because, again, it's safer to adhere to certain expectations and just ways of existing that others can understand easily, right? Sometimes we fall into this idea of, I have to make myself easily understandable to others so that I feel safe. And that is true sometimes, right? But of course, over time, that'll make you very uncomfortable in your own skin. And the parts of you that you're resisting, right? Those parts of you that you think you shouldn't be, that you're neglecting, that you're denying, those parts of you will start to scream incessantly until you pay attention to them. They won't stop. And many people go to extremes to try and silence those parts of themselves. And we don't want that, right? We want to integrate those parts of ourselves. That's how we find a sense of balance and just comfort and self-assuredness, self-trust within ourselves. Obviously, again, we have to be mindful of our culture, our society. There are limits, there are boundaries, and sometimes for our own safety, we can't be fully in on what we truly want, right? What's truly aligned with us. And that sucks. It is, a sad reality at times, but I'm sure there are things that you can slowly start to integrate. And I want to implore anybody who struggles with this to slowly start doing that because it will make you feel more in tune and connected with yourself over time. Because the more you try to separate yourself from those parts of you that you shouldn't be, the more disconnected you'll feel, the more you'll be uncomfortable and you'll start to hate yourself, right? Because you're not letting yourself be who you are, right? You're resisting yourself. You're working against yourself every step of the way. So of course you're going to not like yourself over time, right? You're going to see yourself as an enemy. That's your shadow side a lot of the time coming up, right? It's going to come up, it's going to ask you, implore you, beg you to integrate it, and you won't because it's scary. Of course, it feels like a dark side to us. And again, we're not talking about things that are intentionally hurtful. We're not talking about like willfully falling into your depravity as a human. We're not talking about that stuff. We're talking about the parts of you that you've been told that you shouldn't do because it's not right, it's not good, it's not likable, it's not attractive, whatever it is for you. Those parts of you, though, if they keep coming back and they keep emerging, they're yelling at you to see them, you need to integrate them. It can be in small ways at first, but it needs to be established that you will listen to yourself and that you will hold space for these parts of you that need to be there. Otherwise, they're going to manifest in other areas of your life, right? They're going to show up in cognitive distortions, as Jung talks about in his theory. It's going to make you look at the world differently. It's going to make you look at yourself differently. It's not going to feel good. So while it's scary initially to integrate these parts of ourselves, the shouldn'ts, over time, it actually feels a lot safer to know that you can open up a little bit, let yourself expand, and then feel safe enough to know that you're not going to go overboard. You're not going to do anything that's not aligned with your values and morals. You're just letting parts of yourself in that have always been there, right? You're just accepting them now for what they are. And then honing them, right? Honing them to fit into the kind of life you want to live, the kind of person you want to be. Because, of course, anything can be taken to extremes. You can be extremely a version of yourself that you think you shouldn't, quote unquote, be. And that might not feel good either, right? We don't want extremes. We want to find a nice, comfortable balance. So it's about figuring out what that means for you. What are the shouldn'ts that you've been conditioned to believe are true, right? Like you shouldn't do this. You should do this instead. Who told you that they're true? Who would it serve for you to perpetuate this belief, right? That these things are things you shouldn't do. And what would it mean about yourself if you leaned into them? What would that mean? What would you think about yourself if you started leaning into them? Those are all beliefs that you have to kind of examine and deconstruct, because they're probably blocking you from being able to step into those parts of yourself. So as an example for me, a big part of my own shadow self has been my creativity. I've only really started leaning into it openly, authentically, vulnerably for the past 3 years, really. And is when I started doing that, getting to the flow of it, that I realized that this was exactly the part of me that I was resisting integrating for a long time. And it made me very uncomfortable with myself. Of course, it's not easy. It's not always fun. There are difficulties to integrating these parts of you, these shouldn'ts. But I think over time, as you do it and you ease your way into it, you'll realize that these are missing pieces that you've always felt were missing. There are parts of you that you always knew needed to be there, but you didn't understand why exactly. I knew for my entire life that creativity, writing, some sort of art was part of me, but I always denied it because the common narrative for many people who are artistic is that, art, creativity is childish. You shouldn't be doing it. It's childish. You have to grow up. And as I've gotten older, as I've examined these beliefs some more, I've realized that a lot of the time, the people that were telling me these things were people who were not creative themselves and who would probably benefit from being creative. They were neglecting their innate creativity, because I think as humans, we're all creative. Like we are creative beings, no matter what you're doing, you're creating in some way. They were neglecting it within themselves, like intentional creation. And it was affecting the way they saw the world. It was creating cognitive distortions for them. And that was just being projected onto me, onto the people around them. So as you grow up hearing these things, seeing these things, you start to internalize them as true for you. It was only when I started getting older and learning more, understanding myself better, journaling a lot, of course, that I realized that these were just beliefs, and beliefs can be changed. And the beliefs, if they're not serving you and allowing you to be your kind of highest self, whatever that means for you, what's the point of them really? Because they're benefiting someone, but they're not benefiting you. So who are they really benefiting ultimately? And do you want to continue benefiting whoever it is that's benefiting off of your misery, in a sense? Because the more we perpetuate these beliefs, the more they're benefiting someone, not us, but we kind of have a hand in that, right? We have a hand in our own misery sometimes. Not always, of course. Sometimes these are things that we're forced to participate in, again, because if we didn't, it would be dangerous for us, totally. But sometimes, we have a hand in our own misery and we're not realizing it until we sit and we think about this stuff. So it was only as I got older, I started really allowing myself to do the vulnerable things that I thought I shouldn't do, putting myself out there creatively, sharing my thoughts and ideas, being very intentional with it, being very open with it, that I realized, oh yeah, this was the part of me that felt so that I felt so disconnected from my whole life that manifested in ways that were just a deep dissatisfaction, right? It was a deep dissatisfaction. I never understood why throughout my life until I started integrating this piece. And now I understand, looking back, obviously, hindsight is 2020. Looking back, I was like, yes, of course. It was this piece that I knew. I always knew it because it was always there. It was kind of staring me right in the face, but I didn't want to see it. And I think a lot of us struggle with this. There are parts of ourselves that we don't want to see, because to see them means we can't unsee them after, right? Like once you've been enlightened in that way, it's hard to be blissfully ignorant anymore. But also because when you see it and you know that you can't unsee it, now it means you have to either lean into it, which, posits its own struggles and fears and whatever, or it means to continue denying it, which also has its own struggles and discomfort. So this is, I think, why many of us prevent ourselves from seeing the truth of who we are and don't allow ourselves to lean into the shouldn'ts. But the shouldn'ts are sometimes exactly what you need to do to reach your full potential, whatever that means for you. Again, this can mean anything for anybody. Your full potential can be completely different than what full potential means for me or means for anybody else. But for you, right, to fully feel connected with yourself, to not feel like you are disjointed, to not have that dissatisfaction of not trusting yourself. That's why you have to lean into the shouldn'ts sometimes. So whatever those shouldn'ts are for you. So I would implore you, if you struggle with this, if you know that there's something here that you're not quite seeing or facing about yourself, or maybe you have the awareness of, exactly what the shouldn'ts are, the things that you're told not to do, or that you've internalized as you shouldn't do these things. Sit down, write them out, be clear, be honest, be vulnerable with yourself, be brutally honest with yourself, truly, because you have to be. At times, you have to show yourself tough love sometimes. And that means being brutally honest with what you're doing or what you're not doing and how it's affecting you, because it is affecting you in some way. Again, sometimes you can't not do it, or you can't do these things because it'll be dangerous for you depending on your circumstances, of course, right? Be mindful of that. Like, there's no point shaming yourself when you know that this is the best thing for you right now. But if you know that the only thing that's preventing you from doing the shouldn'ts is purely just insecurity, fear of going against old beliefs, old mindsets, changing how you see yourself, it's time to do that. It's time to step into it. So sit down, make a log of all the things that you think are shouldn'ts, things that you shouldn't do, and try and find a way to start doing some of them. Start small, start with small things, integrate them into your life slowly and see how you feel about it, because that'll change the way you see them too, right? Like they'll be shouldn'ts at first, but when you start doing them and you start showing yourself like, oh, these are things that I actually do now, they don't feel as scary or as uncomfortable as they once did. They're not as dark and, part of that shadow realm as they once were. Now they're just part of yourself. And then you start seeing yourself differently. You start seeing yourself as maybe a little bit lighter than what you thought, right? Because if we're using the analogy of like dark and light, shadow self, whatever, when you bring it out of the shadows and you just bring it into yourself as you are, you don't see yourself as these binaries, right? As good and bad, right and wrong, what I should do, what I shouldn't do. It's just who you are. It relieves you. It relieves a weight off your shoulders when you allow that to happen, because now you're just who you are, and that's it. And it's as simple as that. Even though we're complex beings, we have many facets to us. It can be as simple as, this is who I am, and this is what feels aligned with me at my core, aligned with the kind of person I want to be, my values, my morals, all that stuff. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. I wrote a Substack essay about this as well. I went into more detail over there. So if you want to read that, follow me over on Substack. If you want to see some of my short form content, follow me on TikTok and Instagram. And if you want to talk to me one-to-one about these things and explore these in more detail with me, feel free to book a call over on my website. Other than that, thank you for being here, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.